The wind came down from the mountains like a warning that night, sharp and unforgiving, cutting through the Montana plains as if it meant to scrape the land bare. Eli Grayson stood at the edge of his failing ranch, boots half buried in snow, coat patched more times than he could remember. The barn behind him leaned like an old man tired of standing, its roof creaking under the weight of ice. The world had taken most things from Eli already: his parents, his wife, his cattle, even his faith that tomorrow would be kinder than yesterday. All he had left was the land and the stubborn habit of surviving. He should have gone inside. The fire was weak but warm enough. His dinner was waiting, half a potato and some beans he'd stretched across 3 days. But something stopped him, a sound, not the howl of wind or the groan of timber. It was thinner, fragile, almost swallowed by the storm. A cry. Eli froze. He told himself it was an animal, a fox maybe, or the wind playing tricks on a lonely man's ears. But then it came again, high-pitched, desperate, a child. He grabbed his lantern and trudged toward the sound, every step sinking deep into the snow. The storm fought him, stinging his face, blinding his eyes. When the lantern beam finally cut through the white, it landed on a shape huddled against a fallen fence post. 6 shapes. A woman lay on her knees, her body curved protectively, over 5 children clinging to her like branches to a dying tree. Their clothes were soaked, their faces pale, lips blue. One child wasn't moving. Eli dropped to the ground without thinking. "Hey," he said, his voice breaking. "Hey, can you hear me?" The woman lifted her head. Her face was hollow with hunger, eyes dark and sunken, but still burning with a fierce, terrified light. "Please," she whispered. "They're cold. They haven't eaten in days." Eli didn't ask who they were or how they got there. He didn't ask why a widow and 5 children were wandering through a blizzard. He shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around the smallest child, lifting her into his arms. "Come on," he said. "You're coming home with me." The cabin was barely big enough for 1 man, let alone 7 souls dragged in from the brink of death. Eli stoked the fire until the flames leapt like they hadn't in years. He wrapped the children in every blanket he owned, old quilts, horse covers, even burlap sacks. He boiled water, mashed the last of his food into thin soup, feeding them slowly, carefully, afraid their bodies might give up if shocked by kindness. The woman sat near the fire, trembling, her hands wrapped around a tin cup. "My name is Mara," she said quietly. "My husband died last winter. The landlord took our house. We were trying to reach my sister's town. We never made it." Eli nodded. He didn't trust his voice. He watched as one child finally stirred, a soft breath escaping her lips. Something tight in his chest loosened. That night, Eli slept on the floor while the widow and her children took his bed. He listened to the storm rage outside and realized something terrifying and wonderful all at once. Saving them might cost him everything he had left, and he didn't care. The morning after, Mercy morning, came quiet and cruel. The storm had passed, leaving the world frozen solid. Eli stepped outside and stared at his land. Thin cattle tracks, empty pens, a future already hanging by a thread. 6 more mouths meant faster ruin. He knew that. But when he stepped back inside and saw the children eating, laughing softly for the first time, something stronger than fear took root. Mara met his eyes. "We'll leave as soon as we can walk," she said. "You've done enough." Eli shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "You'll stay. Winter ain't done with us yet." And in that moment, without knowing it, Eli Grayson stopped being a poor rancher with nothing left and became a man with a purpose, the cost of kindness. Food ran out fast. Eli took dangerous work in nearby towns, chopping ice, hauling timber, doing jobs that paid in bruises and pennies. Mara helped where she could, mending clothes, teaching the children to read by firelight, bringing a softness to the cabin that Eli hadn't felt since his wife died. But the world noticed. The landlord who once owned Mara's home tracked them down, accusing her of theft. Authorities threatened to take the children. Hunger returned like an old enemy. 1 child fell ill. Snow came again, and Eli stood in front of them all and said, "If you're taking them, you'll have to go through me. A stand in the snow, The confrontation happened in the same field where Eli first found them. Men on horses, papers in hand, cold authority in their eyes. Mara clutched her children, shaking. Eli stepped forward, boots planted deep in the snow. He spoke of nights spent feeding starving mouths, of children who survived because someone chose mercy over comfort. His voice carried across the white fields like a prayer shouted at the sky. Something changed. One man looked away. Another lowered his papers, and for the first time in a long time, the world blinked. Spring came slowly, but it came. The ranch changed. Neighbors helped. Crops grew. Laughter replaced silence. Eli built a bigger table. Mara planted a garden. The children learned to run again. Years later, when people asked how Eli Grayson survived the hardest winter of his life, he would smile softly and say, "I didn't save them. They saved me." Spring had arrived on the calendar, but Montana didn't care much for calendars. Snow still clung to the shadows like a bad memory, and the wind carried the same bite that had nearly taken 6 lives months before. The land looked calmer, yet Eli Grayson knew better. Hard seasons didn't always announce themselves with storms. Sometimes they came quietly, disguised as hope. The ranch was fuller now, no longer silent, but it was also thinner. The fire died, his body learning a new language of exhaustion. The children helped where they could, small hands gathering kindling, sweeping the cabin, feeding the last of the chickens. Mara worked beside Eli without complaint. Her strength born not from ease, but from survival, sharpened by loss. Yet whispers traveled faster than kindness. In town, people talked. Some said Eli was a fool, taking in mouths he couldn't afford. Others said the widow was using him, that desperate women always found soft-hearted men when winter came. A few spoke darker words, about charity turning into dependency, about children who weren't his burden. Eli heard none of it directly, but he felt it in the way shopkeepers watched him count coins, in the way men paused their conversations when he entered the saloon to ask for work. The world had a way of punishing men who stepped out of line. Trouble came on a gray morning when the youngest boy, Samuel, collapsed beside the woodpile. Mara screamed his name, and Eli was already moving, lifting the child into his arms. Samuel burned with fever, his breath shallow and fast. The memory hit Eli like a hammer, the night in the snow, the stillness, the fear that it was already too late. They wrapped Samuel in blankets, but the cabin offered little defense against sickness. Eli saddled his horse immediately. The nearest doctor was 2 towns away, across half-frozen trails that could break a man's neck if the weather turned. "I'll be back," Eli said, forcing calm into his voice. He met Mara's eyes, saw the terror she tried to hide for the children's sake. "He'll be all right." But as he rode, doubt followed him like a shadow. He didn't have enough money. He didn't have influence. And kindness, he was learning, didn't count as currency when life demanded payment. The doctor examined Samuel with a grim face. "Pneumonia," he said. "He needs medicine, warmth, rest." Eli swallowed. "I'll get whatever he needs." The doctor named the price. Eli's hands clenched. It was more money than he had earned in months. Outside, the sky darkened again. Snowflakes began to fall, slow at first, then heavier. Another storm was coming, and this one wasn't just after flesh. It was after resolve. Eli returned home with half the medicine, his pockets empty, his heart heavier than when he'd left. That night Samuel's fever broke, but barely. The child slept fitfully, his breaths rattling like dry leaves. Mara sat beside him all night. Near dawn she finally spoke, her voice low and raw. "If this is too much," she said, "say it. I won't blame you." Eli stared into the dying fire. He thought of his wife's grave, of empty barns, of the easy life he could have chosen by closing his door that first night. Then he shook his head. "This ain't too much," he said quietly. "This is what staying looks like." Outside, the wind rose again, and somewhere beyond the hills, forces far colder than winter were already moving, ready to test whether mercy could survive what came. Next, the storm arrived before nightfall, swallowing the ranch in a white silence so complete it felt like the world had been erased and redrawn without permission. Snow stacked against the cabin walls, sealing cracks, muting sound. turning every breath inside the house into something sacred and fragile. Eli reinforced the door with a plank, shoveled until his arms burned, then shoveled again. He worked not because it would save them, but because stopping felt like surrender. Inside, Samuel's breathing grew shallow once more. Mara pressed a cloth to the boy's forehead, whispering words Eli couldn't hear, but somehow understood. Prayers didn't always come out as prayers. Sometimes they came out as promises whispered to children who were too young to know how close they were to the edge. By midnight, the medicine was gone. Eli stared at the empty vial in his hand. The doctor's words echoed like a sentence already past. He looked at Mara, then at the other children sleeping in tight, worried knots, their bodies drawn inward, as if they could make themselves smaller and easier for the world to ignore. "I'll go," Eli said suddenly. Mara's head snapped up. "Go where?"
"Back to town."
"You'll die out there," she said, her voice breaking for the first time since Eli had known her. "The roads are gone. The wind." "I know," he said gently, "but I also know what happens if I stay." She stood, blocking the door. "You've already done more than anyone ever has for us. I won't let you throw your life away." Eli met her gaze, steady and unflinching. "I ain't throwing it away," he said. "I'm spending it where it matters." For a long moment, the storm was the only thing speaking. Then Mara stepped aside. Eli wrapped his scarf tight, took the lantern, and disappeared into the snow. The wind nearly tore him from his horse within the first mile. Snow lashed his face, freezing his lashes shut. The world narrowed to pain and motion, each step a decision, each breath a negotiation. More than once he thought of stopping just for a moment, just to rest. That was how winter killed men, kindly, quietly. He thought of Samuel's, small chest rising and falling, like it was unsure it wanted to keep going. He thought of the night he found them, of the sound that had pulled him out into the storm when he could have stayed warm. So he kept moving. By dawn, Eli stumbled into town, half frozen, his hands bleeding, his vision swimming. He didn't knock at the doctor's door. He collapsed against it. The doctor took one look at him and swore. "You're a fool," he muttered, dragging Eli inside. "Kid," Eli rasped. "Widow's boy. Needs this." The doctor hesitated only a second before shoving a full bottle into Eli's shaking hands. "You don't owe me," he said quietly. "The world does." Eli didn't remember the ride back. He woke on the cabin floor to warmth, to light, to the sound of children crying, not in fear but relief. Mara knelt beside him, tears streaking her face, her hands gripping his coat like she was afraid he might vanish if she let go. "He's breathing easy," she whispered. "The fever's gone." Eli tried to sit up and failed. His body screamed in protest, every joint stiff, every muscle bruised by cold and stubbornness. He laughed weakly. "Told you," he murmured. "This is what staying looks like." The storm passed 2 days later. When the sky finally cleared, neighbors arrived, drawn by rumors, by guilt, by something that felt like shame wearing a better coat. They brought food, medicine, wood, a cow. One man removed his hat and said nothing at all, which somehow meant more than any apology. Word spread fast. Not about a poor rancher, about a man who walked into death so 6 others didn't have to. Eli never asked for thanks. He never told the story himself. But that winter became something people remembered, not because of how cruel it was, but because of the moment it failed. And as Samuel took his first strong steps outside the cabin, laughing in the snow that once tried to claim him, Eli Grayson understood something that would shape the rest of his life. Mercy doesn't end when the storm does. It only begins there.